Okay. Good morning, Jim and Tomi.
Good morning.
I wanted to interview you because I've been charged with writing an e-news article about you. And on the occasion of your 90th birthday, how the heck did you get to be 90?
Darn if I know. Don't ask me. I'm just an innocent bystander.
It wasn't easy.
Well, I have the sense that it may not have been easy, but you did it gracefully.
Well, thank you. I think I owe my parents mainly for their DNA.
Well, yeah, there's always that. So I wanted to start with some backstory because, you know, I met you probably 25 years ago now.
2010.
Which was kind of far along in the Jim Allison story. Can you tell me a little bit about Jim Allison in the early years? Were there siblings? What did your parents do?
Okay. My parents were too young. And so I was handed off to my grandparents for the actual upraising. Mainly, they did most of it. And I grew up in Fresno, California, and I lived in Fresno and on a farm outside of Fresno. Went to a 3-room country school called Scandinavian School for my early education. And the rest of my schooling was in public schools in Fresno, in the city.
Big city.
Big city of San
Were you a good student?
I was an excellent student. Yeah, I was a very good student. Although I had to be given a talking to by my 7th grade teacher, my 6th grade teacher, who thought I wasn't studying mathematics sufficiently with enough energy. Had a talk with her, with my grandmother and her, and I straightened up and was an excellent student thereafter, even in mathematics. Graduated from Roosevelt High School in Fresno, and had enough academic achievement then to get into the only college I applied for, which was University of California at Berkeley. And spent 4 years happily at Berkeley, majoring in psychology. The Korean War began about the time I went to Berkeley in the summer of 1950 is when it started. So I had a college deferment during my Berkeley years, and an armistice was signed, of course, in 1953, just before I graduated from Berkeley. But the draft was still in full force then. I knew I would be joining the Army one way or another before long. So I volunteered for the draft and was drafted into the Army in 1954. I went through basic training in the summer of 1954 at Fort Ord near Monterey. Was sent to court typist school instead of the infantry, thank God. And after I finished clerk typist school, I was sent to Germany, where I spent almost 2 years in Heidelberg at the U.S. Army headquarters, Europe, in the medical division. We were billeted at the hospital in Heidelberg, where General Patton had died following his accident, and spent a couple of years there, and then came back I was discharged in Germany, where I spent a couple of months studying German intensively. Got homesick for the United States, went back to the United States in December of 1956, looked for a job. I had been accepted to graduate school in sociology at Berkeley. If I wanted to go, I could have done that. But I needed to make some money first, despite the GI Bill. And so I looked for work in Fresno and found a job at the probation office, juvenile probation office in Fresno. And that's where I met Tomi. She was also working in the probation office in the girls division. I was in the boys division. decided that I wanted to study psychology instead of sociology. So I applied to Claremont Graduate School, which I'd heard about from a colleague in the probation department. He had a master's degree in clinical psychology from that department, and through his influence, I applied there, was accepted, and spent a couple of years there getting a master's degree, during which time Tomi and I got married.
Is that still in California now?
Still in California, yeah. And decided I wanted to,
Claremont's down in the Los Angeles area.
yeah, it's not
Yes.
far from Los Angeles. And was influenced by one of my professors at Claremont, who had got a PhD at Michigan, to go to Michigan for further training. So I applied to Michigan and a few other places, and was admitted every year I applied, and decided to go to Michigan. So we pulled up stakes, and in 1959, we left California and settled in Ann Arbor, where I spent 4 years getting a PhD and having a couple of children. And that's when we moved to Bloomington in 1963, right after I got my PhD. And spent 29 years on the faculty in the psychology department, and during which time Tomi developed a local political career, became a member of the city council for 5 years, and served as president twice, ran for mayor after on the departure of one of our president in-house.
Yes, I've read her book, The Accidental Mayor.
Yeah, right.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so that's how you know the rest.
I know the rest of her story. Did you have any siblings, Jim?
No, I had a half sister, but no siblings.
So psychology.
Yeah.
What did you plan to do with it, and what did you end up doing with it?
Well, I was trained as an experimental psychologist, and I meant to do research as an experimental psychologist. And in the course of that, I published several papers while I was on the faculty here, and became known for one of the more important papers in my field in the 20th century, I think, which exploded the notion of the conventional conception of reinforcement, as developed by E.L. Thorndike in his Law of Effect. The research I did on the question of reinforcement indicated that the classic theory of reinforcement was false. It was quite empty and needed to be replaced by something that we called, well, I don't bother about what I called it, but developed an alternative that was widely accepted and considered to be revolutionary at the time. And this theory of reinforcement I developed with a colleague named Bill Timberlake morphed into an interest in my part in economics. I thought that economics and psychology had quite a lot in common, and the bridge was produced by the theory that Bill and I had developed of reinforcement. It led me rather smoothly into the notion that much of what psychologists were doing could be classified also as economics. And this led to a book I published in 1983 called Behavioral Economics, and led to my connection with lots of other psychologists who got interested in the same topic at about the same time I did. And that was what I was doing when I finally decided it was time to retire.
So is this focused on the behavior of crowds or the behavior of individuals in terms of economics?
It's called behavioral economics, and it approaches economics from the standpoint of an experimental psychologist who had been studying rats mainly, working for food rewards in his laboratory. And that's what I was doing. I discovered I was doing economic research unknowingly. When I was asking rats to press levers for food rewards and water reward and things like that under various schedules, which I turned out to be I was manipulating the behavioral price of water, and they were conforming to the economic law of supply and demand.
Bring it up to date about the treatment of OCD.
Okay, this theory that we had developed about reinforcement, it became quite widely known, including in my own department, by the head of our clinical psychology department, a fellow named Dick McFall, who was interested in developing a therapy for OCD, obsessive compulsive behavior.
Disorder.
Yeah. And he came to my office one day and said, Jim, I think I have a problem. I have a patient with OCD who's come to me, and he's gone to doctors, he's gone to psychiatrists, and nobody's done any good for him. I wonder if I could confer with you about a possible theoretical approach based on your theory of reinforcement. And it turned out that this is the story he told me. The patient had come into his office as a graduate, as a music school student. Indiana University has a famous music school, and he was a violinist, and he was faced with the problem of doing an audition for faculty to determine whether he was going to be allowed to continue in the school and possibly go to graduate school also. His problem was that his bowing arm had been giving him a lot of pain. And he had gone to all kinds of people for treatment, and they gave him various kinds of advice, which he followed, but none of it worked. The pain remained, and it was quite an impediment. And he had this practical demonstration of his ability coming up in a very short time, like 3 weeks. He was going to have to show his faculty members that he could play the violin adequately to stay in the program and possibly go to graduate school. So he was desperate. So he came to the clinic, psychological clinic, hoping that maybe somebody there could help him. I said, well, let's have a look at it. Let's try to analyze this in terms of the theory that we've developed. And I said, what is his behavior that we want less of is pain, shoulder pain, arm pain. So I drew a graph on the board, a little two-dimensional graph, horizontal axis, vertical axis. And what we want him to do is to reduce. We could. He's not always in pain. There are some times that he's without pain. And what we want to do is increase his time without pain. That's what we want to increase as a kind of an instrumental response, analogous to rats. We want the rat to press the lever more for food pellets. Okay. So we want more pain-free time from him. That's what we want. So let's put that on the abscissa here, the horizontal axis. The amount of time pain he has typically right now before treatment. And we have to set up a contingency schedule so that we're going to get more pain-free time out of him. So what we find, well, let's do for the vertical axis, instead of having water, is he going to get for his reward like a rat, or a food pellet. Let's find out what he likes to do normally, and let's make access to that thing he likes to do normally contingent on more pain-free time. You can't have more of this thing until you give us more of your pain-free time.
Rewards.
Okay, so we have this two-dimensional graph and a dot, which which represents the amount of pain-free time he has now on the horizontal axis, and on the vertical axis we have this thing he wants to do. Well, it turns out the thing he likes to do a lot is practice his violin. Okay, so you can't practice your violin unless you give us some more pain-free time. If you do this much pain-free time, you can practice your violin this much. And we set it up so that he couldn't achieve his normal amount of practice time without increasing his amount of pain-free time above its normal level. Okay. So he does this, he gets this, he gets this. Okay. And if this is a rat running in an activity wheel, the normal result of this kind of schedule, which we call the response deprivation schedule, technically, is that the rat does more than his normal amount of wheel running or flutter pressing in order to get his normal amount of eating or drinking, or in this case, violin playing. Okay. So I drew this little graph for my colleague on my blackboard and said, this is what you have to do. So he said, okay, I'll do the measurements and implement the schedule with his cooperation and see what happens. And couple of weeks later, he comes back into my room, my office, and said, Jim, it worked. It worked. He's got pain-free time. And the schedule worked, and he's taken his test and he's passed it, and he's in the music school now.
Neat.
Well,
Very neat.
the follow-up was that he followed up with this guy for years, and he got into graduate school. He got his MA in the graduate school of music, got a job in an orchestra. Everything was hunky-dory. So he said, well, we have to test this out more thoroughly. One observation isn't enough. So after I left, that was about the time I left the faculty. I was in 1992, I guess. I retired about then, but he kept on with his career as clinical psychologist, head of the clinic. And every year we would have a practicum, and he would have his practicum students find people suffering from OCD, and whatever the symptom might be. I can't go to bed at night without checking the lights off 50 times, or the
Right, whatever
OCD
it
stuff.
is.
Yeah. And over the years, he developed quite a big experiment with these patients recruited, and tested and measured and subjected to the kind of schedule I just described to you for whatever the malady might be, right? And for what do they like to do? They like to watch TV, or they like whatever it was, And he developed quite a large database, and he retired without publishing the results. He and I crossed paths, like 15, 20 years later. And we in our socialization, I said, why don't have you ever published it? He said, no, I haven't published it, but I should. And I encouraged him to find his old data, if he could, and put it together and publish it. So he went back to the psychological clinic and the archives. They have archives there, just to find out whether they were still there. His data were still there.
Yeah.
Lo and behold, it was all still there. He pulled it out. He put it together. He wrote it up with some help from me and a few other people. Submitted it to the leading journal of clinical psychology. They accepted it like that. They published it in 2019, and it's one of the most read articles now in this journal.
The one thing I think is about this is that in OCD treatment, what they do is negative stuff to stop the OCD rather than positive stuff.
Yeah, they make them do this thing that they get tired of it, and
Yes.
Yeah,
that's the standard treatment, which is traumatic to both the clinical clinician and the patient. It's really aversive and nasty.
But
And the way it worked with these graduate students, they would get the patient and they would.
It's okay. She understands.
They
You're
would-
going to move on.
Okay.
Yes.
And all the patient does, he comes in once or twice a week to show the graduate student what he's doing. And he goes out, he implements the schedule himself,
It's very cheap.
Yes.
And it's
Very cheap.
yeah,
Cheap.
it's cheap.
Well,
and it's it would work in 100% of the cases,
yes, but you're not making any money for the big pharma if you do it this way, of course.
So that's the story.
Well,
And anytime I
it's
got
really inspiring. That's a great story, Jim.
But in the meantime, I got interested in these other things too that you know me for. You know.
Yeah,
You got interested in the corporations versus
Yeah,
democracy.
yeah.
That's we were at a political gathering.
I told you about this, the
Yeah.
cocktail party and Howard Dean and all this stuff, you know.
well, for the recording, why don't you just tell me one more time?
Yeah.
Okay. When we first came to Bloomington in '63, Tomi joined the local chapter
Of the WILPF.
of WILPF,
Mhm.
which was involved in anti-war activities at the time.
Yeah,
And when that was over with, she turned to local politics
yeah.
and became the city member of the city council
Yeah,
and
she knows that.
eventually mayor. And then when she left that, we got involved again. She got involved again in WILPF through this cocktail party I told you about, which involved a conference call with Howard Dean, and it was involved in his presidential
Right.
politics.
But in terms of political movement, actually in Ann Arbor is where we became in effect radicalized by reading I.F. Stone, from a friend.
A fellow graduate student told us about I.F. Stone. We got involved with I.F. Stone.
Stone?
I don't know I.F. Stone.
Oh man, you got to look it up.
Yeah.
I mean, really, because I.F. Stone,
he was a journalist.
It was
had a weekly newsletter. And
how he operated was he would never go to press conferences. He would go to the original source. Whatever the press conference was based on, he'd go to the original sources, and he would pull out the real things that were happening and just put them in this little
weekly newspaper.
Newspaper. And it was, of course, on the Vietnam War, this was real things that were happening.
Just look up I.F. Stone's, just Google I.F. Stone's Weekly.
I.F. Stone's Weekly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take a look at it. Yeah, that I imagine that during the 60s, when the war was going on, a lot of people's eyes were opened about, what the difference was between patriotic zeal and corporate greed and profiteering, and what was really behind that war. But
right, and you see, that was the source of really sort of this, there's more information than just what is on the surface,
right.
So
in fact, when we were at Michigan, that's when SDS was formed at Michigan.
Yes, one of our members is from Ann Arbor, Odile Huguenot Haber, and Alan Haber, and Alan was involved with forming the SDS back then.
You had nothing to do with SDS.
No, but it was formed.
It was there. But I'm just telling you about. We came from a agricultural area in the Central Valley of California with about this kind of view of the world, right?
Yeah.
And by the time we got to Ann Arbor and started reading things like I.F. Stone, we're getting into what is behind with real facts, and that is really what sort of made us look at things. And I don't know whether it inspired you to dig into the real sources or not, but that's what I.F. Stone did.
Actually, my political education started in Heidelberg with my contact with Larry Graver.
Okay.
Who's a graduate of CCNY.
So when I'm trying to connect your behavioral psychology work with the economy work, with Move to Amend and the pro-democracy work and WILPF study course.
Well, but
it's really independent of that.
No, but here is the Vietnam War is, what got us into just looking at politics, as an anti-war. And then after that, there was the concern. We began to be concerned about the corporate power, because in politics. And when at this party, and it was Asha Lesher, wasn't it, that told us
Yes.
that there was a corporations versus democracy study. And at this time, you were already on behavior economics, so we were interested in economics, James.
Yeah, but I was retired by then.
Yes, but you were the interest in economics is what, and its effect on all the social issues. This was the whole thing, and the fact that there was something there to study. And boy, did we dove into it.
We did, yeah.
So in Bloomington, in Des Moines, we had, over the course of probably 4 or 5 years, we would have maybe 3 to 5 courses, these small group discussion groups that met in people's living rooms or in church basements or community centers, going during the course of every year for 3 to 5 years. And over time, we must have trained or educated or, involved hundreds and hundreds of people.
Mhm.
How did that go in Bloomington? How many?
It wasn't as big, but we did do the study with people, and we did it more than once. And we also started book reading again on this kind of topic of the corporate power in democracy.
We learned about your efforts in Iowa, and we were very impressed with what you've been able to do. You had these big meetings, and they were frequent, and they were well attended. It was very well organized, I thought. We were very impressed with what you were doing in Iowa.
Well, the women who were leading that were senior to me, had been working on it for longer than me, and they were tireless. They were like terriers with a bone. They kept lists of everyone they invited each time they ran one of these courses, and who said they could make it, who said they would like to do it but couldn't do it right then, who wasn't interested at all, who said they didn't have 10 times that they could meet. And they would pursue them, over the course of several years. They did not let up. They would go back to them over and over again and say, well, you said you couldn't make it last time, but we're running it again. Maybe you'll be able to make it. And then at the end, as sort of a last effort, they planned this full day of multi-track speakers that sort of covered the breadth of the whole study course. And we had probably 300 people there. We served lunch and
well, the only thing that I could say about Bloomington was ours really just wasn't big. It would be the Unitarian Church. It'd be the I think there were some.
We'd be at the library.
We'd have programs at the library. We used the Molly and Jan show.
Jan and Molly show.
Jan and Molly show a lot. And we would have these sessions, and we would, but it didn't build into anything big. The biggest thing that we had are that, but it was getting a little bit more out. But remember, after the Occupy Wall Street, those young people at the university want to put it on a day-long seminar, and we had a section of it, you know, to talk about corporations versus democracy. So, you know, in terms of our impact on the city, there were so many competing interests, you know, and there were so many other things, especially with the civil rights and all these different things. But we always kept in touch with all these other organizations, and we kept this whole left bit moving. But
Well, one of the things that affected me was I started condensing books for the use of people who I knew didn't have time to read a whole book. One of the things I condensed was Gangs of America, which was full of this stuff about corporations and Supreme Court and shenanigans and all. And I learned about Tom Hartman, who was involved in the same thing. And then we had this conference call. I don't know how it came about, but it was the National WILPF conference coming up in San Francisco, and we had this conference call where we came in contact with Jan and Molly, and maybe Virginia Rasmussen too.
Yeah, well, we were interacting with them all along, but being able to really, we had programs going all the time, but it didn't get like 300 and stuff like that. It was it was.
But an important development was when we decided to go to the national convention in San Francisco in 2015.
Yeah,
we drove there. That was really an important event because we met Jan there, and Virginia Rasmussen, all these, and Mary Zepnick, maybe all these important, really dynamic, active, knowledgeable people, ladies, and we got all kinds of literature from them, and as a result of that, we later on in a subsequent trip to California, we actually met Jan again and her husband Bill, and got involved further that way. You know, and that's how it all started with us, really.
Yeah. And then we still have the timeline. Do you have the timeline?
Oh yes, I do.
Yeah.
And
that really should be used more again, because especially now with the Supreme Court, and it really is, the battle still is corporations versus democracy.
Yes, we still need to, we need to update that course again, because I think the last time was maybe 2008 it was finished, I think, which of course predated Citizens United and all of the horrendous decisions that have come out since then. We still need you, Jim. I think that I'm interested in why branches stopped doing the course. And I think my theory, you'll tell me maybe if I'm correct, my theory isn't that it became less relevant, but that people involved became bored of it. You know, oh, we've done that. You know, we. That's
it. That's exactly it. They're the type of people that we're always looking for the new discovery. You know, the new discovery of what we didn't know. You know, or something like that. And that's but
there's so many people coming behind us now who don't know those facts.
Right.
So I really think that we have to dust off that course, and that's why I'm trying to work to put it into a podcast.
You know, the thing of it is to really, the way I've been thinking here lately is to look at the issue with new eyes. Is because I keep thinking about how we simply accept their view of the world, and we are in opposition to it. You know, their view of the world is a given. And so like they're on the top of the hill and we're trying to keep always, so they have the advantage position. Then I read this book by Polanyi, right? Which I didn't understand 3/4 of it. But one thing he said just absolutely stuck in my mind. He said that the capitalism, the theory of the free market, is flawed from the very beginning. Period. Their idea of the free market as being, this is the field of economics, is that it's totally removed from society.
Mm-hmm.
It's like physics.
It's totally removed from society. And that, therefore, they don't have to address the harm that they do, that it doesn't fit what the society needs. It's not, they'll make up whatever they want to satisfy the whatever people are saying, but their theory, quote unquote, is the free market that doesn't exist, and it can't exist. And yet that's what their whole thing is based on.
Right. Well,
and yet we accept it. We simply accept it, and we argue the symptoms,
Yes, we argue the symptoms, and we don't understand that the free market really means that the most powerful and wealthy among us are free to do whatever they want.
Exactly.
And the rest of us have to just sort of figure out how to exist within.
And we're supposed to clean up after them.
Yeah. But I'm going to come back to this about my saying, looking at it with new eyes. What is an economy? Okay, just start with that. What is an economy? You have a society and you have an economy. What is it? Now, the way they define it is these guys make a profit, and therefore you do these things. And
because profit is the only thing that matters.
Society's things, needs, and stuff like that. But if you really think about it, what is an economy? Well, it's people. They have to. We're a social animal, so the economy is how do we live and meet our needs. Okay, so that's the economy. And then you look at this free market. How is it functioning as an economy? Just without all the isms and stuff like that, just how is it functioning? And if you start looking at it with a clear eye, a different eye, not fighting, I'm not a socialist, I'm not a communist, I'm patriotic, no, just here's the economy.
How's it working for you?
Is it working for you? Yeah. And why not? But then they, smarter than everybody else, comes up with a economic theory, right? And you're fighting the theory, which is flawed from the very beginning.
Yeah, it's true.
But rather than, because you're down here fighting it about whether or not you raise a wage, they won't work if they can get it. You get down in all that kind of stuff.
Well, if I were going to condense a book now for the education of my friends, this is the book I would condense. Do you know
Geniuses, The Unmaking of America.
Evil Geniuses, The Unmaking of America by Kurt Anderson. Yeah. Recent American history with key figures like Lewis Powell and the Powell Memo, detailed analysis of the Powell Memo. Now it's been actualized since then. The Powell Memo has come true, 100% true. And that's the problem with us. You know, I wrote a play about this, about Lewis Powell and his influence. Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about your plays, Jim,
Mhm.
because what a departure from both your academic career and your activism career. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about?
Well, okay. After I retired, I started doing things I wanted to do. One of the things I wanted to do was try my hand at detective fiction. I tried it. I didn't like it. I wasn't very good at fiction. So I sort of stumbled across the kind of thing I like to do, which is reporting on and analyzing current events and historical events. And I just happened across. Should I tell her about Bill Terry?
Well,
And the Tuskegee Flyers and all that.
just because you don't have time, but you can talk about the murders, the stuff like that.
Okay, I investigated a murder that took place in Bloomington that had the whole community up in arms, and I did an historical account of it. I interviewed judges, and I interviewed policemen, and I interviewed family members.
This is the one that occurred during Tommy's administration.
No, it occurred before this. It occurred in 1977.
Co-eds are
Oh.
always being murdered around big universities, right?
Yes.
Well, and this was a
Ann Harmeyer was murdered, and I while I was on the faculty, and I swore that I was going to investigate it after my retirement, which I did. I investigated it after my retirement very thoroughly, wrote a manuscript about it, and reactivated local interest in it. And in fact, it's still being investigated now, partly because of this manuscript. Well, I also got interested in a court martial that took place in World War II of a Black aviator named Bill Terry. He had been involved in a civil rights mutiny based on the fact that the U.S. Air Force was violating its own regulations by having segregated officers' clubs.
which is right in Seymour, right near a little town near us.
And this mutiny took place in Seymour, Indiana, 30 miles from where I live.
A bunch of Tuskegee Flyers.
At an airport where I'd flown my own airplane into it many times. I was familiar with the field. I came across in a bookstore an account of this mutiny, which flipping through it, I came across the word Seymour, Indiana, Freeman Field. What the hell is doing here? It's 30 miles from where it took place there. What is this all about? The mutiny took place there. And I think it was maybe the first organized civil rights demonstration long before Martin Luther King came along. These officers got together and decided they were going to protest this segregation one night. They were going to get together and they're going to approach the white club 2 by 2 and ask for permission to enter the club. And they were turned away, all of them, by an MP standing there. And one of the guys brushed against him a little bit too hard, he was court-martialed for it.
What year was this?
This was 1945.
Wow.
April 12th, 1945. And it didn't get much notice because a week later, Franklin D. Roosevelt died, and the news was all about him, and nobody learned anything about the mutiny.
But to tell the famous blacks that were there in the trial.
There were several during the court martial of this guy. Several eminent black lawyers showed up and just demolished the Air Force Council.
But this guy was court-martialed.
Yeah.
And then bring it up to date to the crime.
Okay, he was convicted on one charge, and for this conviction they could have executed him, because it was a capital offense at the time. But instead they just fined him $150 and put him on house arrest for a while. But it had a bad effect on his career. and also a novel was based on this incident, and I was familiar with the novel, and I wanted to compare the novel with the real incident, so I did, and I found that the novel was nothing like the real incident. The real incident was much more favorable to the blacks than the novel was, and I actually phoned the guy, phoned Bill Terry. When I phoned him, he was,
Sorry, I had to shut the door.
he was an attorney in Los Angeles, and I had a talk with him, and I wrote a big manuscript about it and how it was unjust and so forth and so on. After I did this, I happened through Tomi to encounter an assistant secretary of the Navy who was passing through Crane Naval Depot, which is near Bloomington, and he asked me what I was doing in my retirement. I told him about this account I'd written about this mutiny, and he said, "Well, can you send me the manuscript?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." Sent him the manuscript, and he phoned me a few days later saying, "Is that okay if I give this to my counterpart in the Air Force?" I said, "Sure." And the upshot was that they had been working on this same thing and decided that he had been unjustly convicted of court-martial. And so they were going to expunge his record of this black mark on it, and which they did in a surprise announcement at the annual meeting of the Tuskegee Flyers, of which this guy was president by then. So,
but the important part of this was that he took he went with Freedom of Information, got the whole court-martial record.
The transcript was like this,
and read it.
And it was just dull as hell, but I slogged through it, and I got the essence of it, summarized it in a readable form.
And that's
that in the
what was
manuscript.
sent to the
That was what was.
so
Yeah.
they had a absolute basis to rescind that court-martial, without.
What strikes me about your work, Jim, is that so much of it is based on your sense of what's right and your aggressive curiosity, and your sense that one person can really make a difference in this way, by looking into it, by doing the research, by slogging through long.
Well, let me put the cap on this particular story. A couple of years after all this happened, the Tuskegee Flyers decided to have their annual convention in Indianapolis, during which time they went to Freeman Field for some of their ceremonies too. And Bill Terry was there, and he gave a talk about his experience and how it all happened. And at the end of his talk, he said, "Are there any questions?" And I was in the back, and I raised my hand. He called me. And I said, "My question, Bill, is, did you get your $150 back?" And he said, "Yes, I did."
Well, and your sense of curiosity also brought you to the deep bowels of the Library of the Supreme Court documents.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how that worked?
Well, what an experience that was. Yeah. I decided that we had to go to the Library of Congress to look at Justice Waite's papers at about the time that they were making this decision in Santa Clara Southern Pacific. And we focused on those 4 years, those four years of those papers surrounding that thing. And we went through those papers in 3 days. Tomi and I were there at the Library of Congress, going through these fascinating original documents.
Little notes.
Notes they were writing to one another, God, it was fascinating. It was a lovely experience.
Yeah.
Took all these research notes, went back to Bloomington, wrote it up at a paper that we handed off to Katrina Vanden Heuvel, accidentally, more or less, and she gave it to a journalist, her nation journalist, who used it as a basis for called the climate of corporate personhood, and that's how you got across. became aware of all this stuff, right? Somehow
right.
you got hold of this paper, you said, nice paper, but nobody's going to read it.
You
Remember
you sent it to me, and I read the whole thing. It was fascinating.
Mhm.
It was about 35 pages, I
Yeah, it was a
think.
big paper, yeah.
And I'm
Mhm.
sure that you had boiled it down. I have no doubt that you had edited it within an inch of its life, but it was still so much material for someone to go through that I really doubted that people would sit down with it and give it the attention that it needed and deserved. But the characters that you described were so bigger than life and fascinating and quirky that I said, you know, this seems like it would make a really good play or movie. Why don't you think about writing, you know, this a storyboard or a treatment for that? And
Mhm.
instead, you wrote the play.
And without you, it would never have happened,
That's
right?
right.
It would never have happened.
Right.
Well, and from that, you wrote many more plays,
Yeah, I've done 5 or
which
6
have been produced and
Yeah.
videotaped around the country.
Yeah.
I've always been disappointed that someone in Hollywood didn't take this story on. I don't know how to get it in front of them, but I still think that the story of Chief Justice Waite in the Supreme Court in 1886, and the decision about the Santa Clara versus the Southern Pacific Railway, which really defined where corporations got their foothold
Yeah,
to
and it's
steal
completely fraudulent.
constitutional rights.
Completely fraudulent.
Yes, and it was completely fraudulent. Yeah,
Like what the Supreme Court's doing now, it's completely fraudulent too.
Yeah, but you
Yeah.
see, he should do something on Chief Justice Marshall, where the Supreme got to be supreme.
Yeah, well, I have done a play on it, and it hasn't been produced, but
Yeah,
it's
but
had a
it,
table reading.
yeah, but it
It's called martial law, you know.
yeah,
which
it
is
requires more
another-
digging.
It's another complete fraud, but it's the entire basis of the Supreme Court's authority.
Hmm.
It's not in
Yeah,
the Constitution, it's in an interpretation of the Constitution by Justice Marshall and his gang.
now I don't think I've seen that one. Will you send it to me?
No, you haven't seen it.
It's not been.
It hasn't been recorded, no. Did
I
I
meant
not send it to you? Did
The
I not send it?
document. Yeah,
I'll send it to you then.
okay.
All right.
Yeah, yeah, I'm fascinated by how people now, in view of the reversal of Roe and a bunch of other recent decisions, are up in arms and think that could the Supreme Court be corrupt? I'm thinking, duh.
Let me summarize the martial law for you. At the end of John Adams' term as president, he made several midnight appointments, judicial appointments, minor posts, but judicial appointments last minute, and their commissions had to be delivered to them. And the person who was supposed to deliver them to them was his acting Secretary of State, who at the time was a fellow named John Marshall. Sound familiar? John Marshall?
Yes, I've heard of him.
Okay, well, later John Marshall became a member of the court. And in fact, his name is that of, well, when he was a member of the court, Chief Justice, in fact, in 1803, a case came to the court. The case involving a fellow named Marbury, who was supposed to have received a commission from John Adams the night of John Adams' last term day in office, and it never arrived.
Yet Marshall didn't deliver.
And Marshall didn't deliver it. Now Marshall who was supposed to deliver it to Marbury but failed to do so, was the same marshal who was head of the Supreme Court in Marbury v. Madison. So Marbury brings this case to the court, and Marshall is the Chief Justice of the court, and Marshall is the reason he's there, because he's the one who failed to deliver Marbury's commission to him. Now, don't you think Marshall should have recused himself?
Well, one would think.
One would think so. Yeah, he didn't. He didn't.
And I think a lot of it is that people don't pay attention. You know, ordinary people in their daily lives, they're just struggling to get by. Even at that time in history, maybe especially at that time in history, weren't paying attention to what was going on at that level. That was for the lawyers to worry about.
Yeah.
And as a result, you know, we have what we have now.
Mhm.
But I wanted to spend a few minutes talking more about Jim Allison. Jim, who in your life is somebody that has been like your guiding lights, who you look up to?
My wife, Tomi. Mainly.
Yes, that is certainly a match made in heaven, the two of you.
Yeah.
I think that you've been inspiration for one another in ways that are really exemplary. What do you wish that you had attempted that you didn't get to do in 90 years?
Very little, actually.
What a good life.
Yeah, I've had a very good life. I'm mostly satisfied. I've managed to own my own airplane for a while, my own glider for a while. You know.
Many motorcycles. He's
Lots.
gone up and down the whole country.
I've owned five motorcycles in my life, gone all over the country, all over the United States on my motorcycle. What else is there?
Let's see, if there was one thing you could change about the country, what would it be? I think I know the answer, but
oh boy, I'd change the Supreme Court. I would change the Supreme Court. I would get rid of those unlimited terms. Back in the day, you know, when they wrote the Constitution, gave them unlimited terms, they were very unlikely to live past the age of 55 or 60, you know. That's changed. We need to change that. We need also to well, John Marshall himself said, well, maybe we made a mistake here. Maybe we shouldn't have made the court so independent. Maybe we should share power with the Congress, say, so that Congress could maybe overturn a decision with a supermajority vote by both houses, that kind of thing. That needs to be done too. The Supreme Court is the only branch of our government that has no checks and balances from any other branch of government, with the possible exception of the House of Representatives, because the House of Representatives does initiate impeachment, and it controls the purse strings. The Supreme Court is a very expensive institution to run. It is enormously expensive. They have a basketball court, they have a restaurant, they have all these clerks, they have all this secretarial support, you know. It's an enormously expensive thing, and they get all their money from Congress.
well, and you pointed out to me once that the House of Representatives determines pay raises for the Supreme Court justices, which, gosh, that doesn't seem
That's right.
at all.
They can't reduce their salaries, but they can freeze their salaries. Yeah, if they wanted to.
They don't have to raise them.
They don't have to raise them.
So yeah, it's kind of amazing, really. Besides working on a podcast that I hope will bring this course into more people's consciousness, what else can we do to get this information out there?
I don't know, but I'm very encouraged by the fact that we're seeing more and more books like this, Evil Geniuses, that gives us a pretty realistic idea about who really has the holds the reins of power in this country these days and how it's changed since the Powell Memo was written. Everything in the Powell Memo has come true. Absolutely everything has come true. But
They
I've
were
seen,
pretty effective strategists.
yes, but these things happen in cycles, as this guy points out in his book. And I think we're beginning to see the beginning of another cycle.
Yeah.
We're seeing a reaction, the beginning of a reaction against the Powell type of development, where corporations control everything and have all the money. They're getting all this money and wages are flat. Productivity rises, they're not sharing it. It's all going into executive salaries. Or other salaries are flat.
Right.
This is the
Yeah.
economic truth.
It is. And I do think more people are aware of it, mostly because the middle class, if there is still such a thing, has begun to feel the pinch. While it was just the poorest people, it didn't seem to matter to us.
Yeah.
Much to our chagrin. It's,
one of the things that books like this that you get, and when you start digging and actually go to the original and get actual facts, you know, who voted what way, right? Not what somebody tells you that this party stands for this, or this does this, or their philosophy is this, or what. But what did they actually do? And for me, what really needs is that the liberals and the progressives, I think the progressives are looking at the actual votes, but the Democrats have been complicit. The Democrats have been complicit, and that goes for the wars, and that goes for the corporations' powers and their continuing powers, and etc.
So how do you address that when there are only two parties to choose from, and one is horrible and the other one is complicit?
Yeah, but you see, this is again, go outside that and look at just the voter. Forget the parties. Look at the justice for the voter. Because I think we're in the time when one of these parties are going to split. Don't know which one it is, but there's something else has to come along, because both parties have this lock on the corporate power and where the money goes. As an example, we sort of looked into the gerrymandering and read the book Rat Fucked. But the red map planned for the Republicans to take over all the state legislatures so they could gerrymander and be perfectly able to just keep it going forever, right? And besides, most of the things affecting your lives happen in the states anyway, and it's cheaper to control the states. Anyway, so in the book, fucked or whatever it is. Anyway,
The name of the book is Rat Fucked.
Right.
Only there are a couple of asterisks there instead of a couple of letters.
Right.
So,
But
to get it published, you know.
What it says is this red map was a national program, and the Democrats knew the Republicans were doing it, but they couldn't get their corporate donors to match the money that went into taking over the state legislatures. As an example, just from our Monroe County here, we had when they gerrymandered, they put $500,000 into a state legislative race twice to get it, and this was going on around the state. They brought all modern technology into where you could do it, and put money like that in. Now this is for a part-time job, and they get paid less than $30,000 a year. So they did it because most people don't pay attention to the primaries, and so they took over They took over. But the key to this is this. Because both parties are dependent on this big money, which buys their operations, the Republicans were able to take over the legislatures. They're taking over the courts. What all this is. So, and we don't know it. We don't know. We as liberals, etc., we won't face that fact. We won't dig and face that fact. You know, but you have to face it. You have to face it. If you're going to say, yeah, until we get free of that. And my point here is the freedom to vote, and John R. Lewis addresses all this, you know, addresses the dark money, addresses the gerrymandering, addresses the revolving door lobbyist bit. You get a level field. You couldn't get that through, could you?
Well, you can see why they wouldn't let it through when you put it that way.
But you say, and the Democrats, so I'll blame it on these two guys.
The House passed it.
The House, the progressives put that through. The progressives put that through.
That died in the Senate.
It dies in the Senate, but I say, focus just on Manchin and Sinema. No, there were a lot of people hiding behind them as well. And that we won't face up to. And as you know, and when you talk about economics, you look at Schumer.
Yeah.
Schumer gets his money from the equity folks that are killing our economy. You know, that are buying up the manufacturing plants and stripping them of everything. So I'm telling you, it is, again, you got to step out of what is given to you and just go straight for what the real problem is. That doesn't mean that you're going to win, but at least you'll know what you're dealing with, right?
Well, and now, I mean, you mentioned that journalist Stone, but now, even when you do the hard research and you find those facts and you follow the money, there are so few media outlets which will publish that kind of information, because guess who owns them all? Those big fat cats.
Here's the thing. Forget that. It has to go back to neighbor.
Yes.
You forget all that.
This is again where
of all that, you know.
This is again where those small group discussions could be effective, and the podcast. So as we're looking at this podcast, we're also trying to include a sort of a parallel story about from the 1860s, 1880s till today. What the other thing that fueled this oppressive owner capitalism and corporate power was outright racism. So we're trying to include more stories about that in the materials of the course. Do you have ideas about where we should look for that, or what kinds of facts?
You know who is really being screwed these days? It's all the young people.
With the student loans.
It's not just student loans. It's all the young people. Because if you take every class, every race, every whatever it is, what they're up against, and compare it to what we had, what chances we had. That's what the consolidation of the power has done, what the monopoly of the financial bit, the monopoly of everything. That's what they're the ones. It's not just blacks, it's whites, it's Latins, it's everybody that's young.
But
now
I like to tell them about my own experience when I went to UC Berkeley. There was no tuition.
Right.
What you had to pay was every semester you paid $35 for what they call a student activities fee. In return of which you got to go to the football games, you got to read the Daily Cal newspaper. There was no tuition. $35 a semester. UC Berkeley, one of the finest
And
universities in the
how
world.
did they manage to afford to do that then? And they can't afford to do it now.
Well, the legislature decided they didn't want to support public education anymore. And that was partly because of the influence of Ronald Reagan. Right? It's been
Yeah.
going downhill ever since Reagan, actually, and Proposition 13, things like that. Okay.
But you see, look at it this way. We all know that the future is with the young, just because they have the energy and it's going to be their lives. So it's and they're the ones that are the most victimized by all this stuff. They can't get a house. They can't get they can't get a job.
Their lives are really frozen because of all this debt and
That's
because
right.
of the
Right.
lack of opportunity.
And of course, okay, well then, why not aim at why are they in that situation? Just look at every single thing about their lives. Why are they in that situation? Why are they in that situation? Why are they, you know, and that, if you think about the progressives of the 1900s, the farmers couldn't get their crops to the market, right? Because it was controlled by the railroads. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, that right now, these people can't get to what they need because the monopoly finances, the monopoly, everything is controlled.
Well, to encapsulate it, somebody said recently, in 1900, we had an antitrust movement, but no antitrust law. Now we have antitrust law, but no antitrust movement.
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and we have very little. I mean, I think most of those laws are still on the books, but
course they are.
nobody
Exactly.
enforces them.
Biden is starting. Biden is starting.
Has
Yeah.
started. But where's his backup to it? You know,
Where's his movement?
yeah.
Yeah.
But and another thing, we've been enamored of the internet and the social media, of its technology, about this going to do it, save everything. It's in the control of the present robber barons.
Yes,
Okay?
it is.
We've not said that as liberals, because on social issues, it's anything goes, right?
Well, I'm so impressed with the Filipina journalist Maria Ressa, who has called out Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and all those robber barons who are controlling our media and making it so difficult
Okay, but
to
see
tell the truth.
Right. What I'm coming up with, Marybeth, is this. We, as WILPF people, can understand Blacks being prejudiced against and have barriers. And we study it, and we're all this. Now, what we have to look at is that all the young people are in that position. Now, there are special people, you know, that have they have enough wealth in their families that they're not touched by this, and they're still going along just fine. But the huge number of people, okay,
Yeah.
yes, there's still the people that are been dumped and are still alive and are going to really suffer in their old age, which are going to be the boomers, because there's not going to be the support there for them. But I think where the payoff in terms of somebody realizing things have got to change and maybe would start learning something is to focus on why are the young facing a brick wall on everything they try to do. What just say why, if we compare it to our own background, why why are they having such a problem?
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
in
that's a
terms of
good,
our economy for our society, right? And maybe you get those young people to start looking and digging into stuff like you did with the Wall Street revolt, which was the 99%, bring that back and say, yes, there is, and the economy is supposed to be for the whole society. And so, I mean, if you're looking at a study thing, I'm saying, start
aim
with
it at the people that are most affected. I get it.
most affected. And maybe maybe they'll start looking, because what I in talking with some of these young people, every once in a while I find somebody, they are looking to us for leadership. And I keep thinking to myself, you guys have got to start looking out after yourselves. I mean, like if you're organizing a party, they look for the people in the party to follow. No, do like they did in Colorado. They formed their own party. Yes, they picked the Democratic Party, but they did it themselves. They didn't have the power folks tell them what issues, they decided their own issues. So
Yeah.
maybe your study bit, maybe you start saying, really the question being, why have we been so, why has our economy, what do you say, shut out our young?
Yeah. Well, what about the show we saw just last night? This guy who was talking about this organization,
right,
grassroots organization that nobody even knew about.
right.
We didn't know about it. Tell her about that. Tell her about it. We were watching this on what?
The student debt, is that the one you're talking
No,
about?
not student debt.
What one are you talking about?
This guy who had organized all these grassroots people to go out to all these places just last night.
Yeah, it's not popping up. Anyway, but
Well, when you were talking about the universities in California being free, a few years ago, I visited with some medical students in Iowa, in Des Moines, and they were complaining about the debt they were going to emerge from
right,
this, from all these years of study. And I said, well, politically, we have the power to change that. It didn't used to be this way.
yes,
When I went to college, I got a tuition aid grant because my country invested in its young people back then.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
And we had to pay a reduced tuition, much reduced, because I had a twin brother who was going to college at the same time. And as long as you kept your grades at a certain level, your tuition was kept very low.
Yeah.
And they just looked at me with wide eyes, like,
Well, see,
that happened?
This is why I'm thinking this is that they are at the stages of their life where they are ambitious. They want to do something, and they are channeled into this horrible situation. So they will be seekers. They will be people who are interested.
Right.
And we'll pay attention, and just for them to hit them to begin to really look at what it is and why should it be this way,
Yeah.
and give them some history or so of what.
Well, that's the thing. They don't know that it was, and really when our generation is gone, things never happened. The powerful will be able to convince them that as bad as things are, it's always been that way. Well,
Right.
no.
Right. Or if you want to get ahead, you're going to have to do this.
Let me tell you about the guy who you don't remember from just last night,
Okay.
Rachel's show.
Oh,
This guy got like $100 million from somebody to organized at the grassroots level in the last election we just had. And what he did was he got these young folks financed to go to these states that were in doubt, the swing states.
Swing
And
states.
not to put ads on the radio, but to get them to knock on doors.
Right,
locally.
exactly. That's what I mean. Forget about,
And
because,
we didn't know anything about this.
yeah,
It wasn't in the news at all.
Right.
Rachel Maddow didn't know anything about it. She was
Right.
absolutely gobsmacked when she
Right.
learned about it, and she told us about last night on her show.
right,
This guy nobody ever heard of,
right. And now here's another thing.
who
Is it-
organized this nationwide movement
Right,
that probably swung several elections and made the Democrats. Everybody was wondering how did the Democrats pull this off? Well, that's how they pulled off. Guys like this
yeah,
going to the key states and paying people not to be Democrats, stay away from the Democrat organization, pay these kids to go knock on doors.
Mhm.
That's how they did it.
mhm,
Well, and I think that's one of the strengths of WILPF really is that we're about issues. We're not about supporting a specific party,
right,
a specific candidate. I
right,
think young people are very much turned off by politics these days because they see how complicit both parties are. They may not understand all of the backstory and the details, but they can see the results.
okay, but one of the things I want to use this one example about why it's important to deal with these young people who are ambitious or who are interested or anything like this is I had this young kid who wanted to see me about running for a city council district for the students. Okay, now we've had here a strike by the graduate students because they've been starved in terms of just being able to exist while teaching most of the classes that these people are taking here at the university. And so they went on strike. So this kid is being channeled for a political a bit, and all this kind of. And so I said, well, what do you know about, because he was on the Daily Student newspaper. Okay, what's your opinion of that whole thing? Well, summed up was, well, yes, they weren't being paid enough, but they went about it in the wrong way, kind of thing. So I walked him through, because this has been several years where they have tried all the right ways of doing things, right? And to make him face up to their position, and that they were, okay, and coming up to the end, these are the people you're going to represent, right? Just to make them look wider. And this is why I'm saying that if they're being, as you said, now the middle class is being touched by this economic corporate priority over democracy.
Right.
Well, now's the time to start saying to them, how about you looking into it yourself, looking into why are you in this situation, right? Because it's like it focuses your mind, you're going to be hanged tomorrow morning, right? Well, they're close to being hanged. Okay.
Yes,
All
they
right.
are.
This is what we could help them, because what they're getting is the corporate view from the academics.
Right.
Well, because according to Lewis
Thanks to
Powell's
Powell.
plan, the faculties on these university campuses have been so thoroughly recruited from pro-corporate
Right.
sources.
Right. Right.
Well, I feel like I've kept you a very long time. I don't want to abuse this. I can't tell you, Jim and Tomi, what a privilege it's been for me to work with you. I wish in the last few years we've been doing more together. I feel like our issue committee has really moved in some new and dynamic ways, but I miss you guys and the pro-corporate work. And I think we could make a huge difference if you had the time to come back and do some more work with us. But think about it. Meanwhile, I can't thank you enough for all the work you've already done, the contributions you've made to WILPF's work, and I want to wish you a really happy birthday.
No, thank you very much.
So.
Take care, guys.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
Thank
great
you.
talking to you.
Great talk to you.
Good to talk
Bye.
to you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.